Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal. We are joined today by the great Jason Moran. And I could go on and on talking about the accolades, but he is celebrating 20 years with his band, The Bandwagon. Yeah. Has recorded more than a dozen albums, including the recent Thanksgiving at the Vanguard. Composed music for Ava DuVernay's amazing film Selma, and of course is a 2010 MacArthur Genius Award winner. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm good this morning.
You're back here at Duke. It seems like I can count on you coming to Duke and Durham like every 18 months.
Fortunately. Yeah, I'm back in town. It's actually it's been great to, have cities on the East Coast, that aren't in the Northeast. That relationship between, how the music flows down, is interesting, but also not so frequently traveled. So it's good to at least have a place I can come back and grow with. You know?
I had a chance to hear you in the trio last night, and one of the things that struck me, a couple of things that struck me. One, you go to a Jason Moran and Bandwagon performance, and it's part musical performance and part lecture.
It's become that. It's become that.
And you talked about what it's like to travel to some cities outside the United States,
right.
and how in the United States there aren't a whole lot of places that jazz musicians can go
right.
to really play the music in the U.S., right? And ironically, Durham is one of those places. I'm sure jazz musicians get asked this all the time, at least American jazz musicians. What does it feel like to not really have an audience for the music in the place that you live? Yeah,
it's an odd one. But it's also, I guess for my generation, we kind of grew up with the notion that it just lives everywhere. It lives everywhere, right? And so we didn't watch it, jump off in New Orleans or up in St. Louis or Kansas City and New York and Chicago, right? We didn't watch that happen and grow into this, this style of music that was, extremely popular.
Right.
So I don't live through none of that, right? None of that exists in my timeline. But by the time I'm on the scene and like my first kind of professional gigs, they are in Europe. And not only in Germany, but then you go to Austria, and then you go to Spain, and then you go to, Portugal, and then you go to France and England, and and you start to see also over time, that is a major part of the evolution of the music, is just having a place for the musician to function.
Right.
And especially, I think about groups like Art Ensemble of Chicago, like a lot of the avant-garde groups in the 60s, they really were able to find spaces outside of America to really go there traditionally, and that is something now that we kind of enjoy. But on the other hand, I also thought over the years that I didn't want to solely depend on Europe as a way to tour, that I would have to find another way to interact with America. And it might not only be on the stage, but kind of like, as you said, like since I'm an educator also, then it was to find this way to pull those things closer together, so that my education life at New England Conservatory isn't simply me playing, but it's really discussing the music, the things that I thought were missing in my conservatory upbringing at Manhattan School of Music. The way that you talk about music does not exist at Manhattan School of Music.
Right.
There's no understanding that there are political and social ramifications of the sound, that it represents something. It's very rarely brought up, and it's mostly not brought up because the people teaching it, very few are African American, right? So they really come from the viewpoint already has like a frame on it that I think musicians have been trying to continually reframe, not break it, but reframe how we position our sound. And sometimes Europe, kind of has an open folder for you to just walk in and out of.
I imagine there are a lot of folks that when they think Jason Moran, they think jazz musician. I'd like to add two other descriptors to who Jason Moran is. Archivist and curator. And I'll start with the archivist piece. Just looking at the trajectory of your career, the projects you've been involved with, the Thelonious Monk show that you curated first here at Duke, the work that you did with Fats Waller, the work that you're currently doing with James Reese Europe. Talk about how important it is for you to find these historical figures. Folks know Monk, but they don't, right? They don't know the music. folks know of Fats Waller. They don't understand why the music was important. Right. And then someone like James Reese Europe, I'm thinking about the fact that, it may be 30 years ago when I read David Lovering Lewis's book, when Harlem was in vogue. And that's the first time I ever heard the name James Reese Europe. And really outside of that context, I haven't heard anybody really talk about his work. So talk about these historical figures and what drew you to them.
Right. Well, I mean, there are three musicians who can be seen as, well, I mean, the things that I gravitate towards, and Thelonious Monk kind of set up the paradigm for the things I'd be interested in, because he did everything, but then he also found a way to really kind of have his total sonic identity wrapped up inside gospel music traditions, or, like spirituals, or straight ahead stuff, or, Tin Pan Alley songs. Like, he could make it all sound brand new. And same with Fats Waller. Like, so there's always like this point, and James Reese Europe, each of these musicians, and part of the characteristics that great jazz musicians have is they're able to pull a song into their world. Able to kind of like retell the song that you might identify as one way. Now it's got a whole different identity on it because I'm saying the words now. And James Reese Europe probably is one of the prototypes for that. I mean, here's a musician, writing, pieces for 150 people, 130 people, right? And is also coming around the time of World War I, and then taking those songs that the bands were already playing, military bands were playing, but then totally rearranging the rhythms, totally finding the flexibility in the music, and then reshaping our kind of imagination around it. And that's exciting, And it's difficult to do that because at some point you will meet resistance, Because like, why are you touching the song like that, But that's kind of that's the starting point for me, is like, you have to find something in there to chip at. And those three musicians also, because their deep relationship to Uptown, to Harlem, is also a big point for me as a resident Uptown. That the reason I also live in this neighborhood is because this history still lives there. And it, when you walk around Uptown, that like, this corner was where Minton's still is there. This corner was where Lennox Lounge was. I can walk past the Apollo. The Apollo is it's a gem, for America. But these things become important to me because I don't want to see the gaps start to happen. And my musicians, a generation or two generations older than me, they did that too. So Branford would be talking about old tenor saxophone players you'd never heard of, right? Wynton would do the same thing, and you would always kind of get history from some people you admired. So I thought, in my world, then I can really talk about these people and not feel like they are kind of interfering with my own kind of trajectory. My trajectory is theirs,
Talk about James Reese Europe, though, because a lot of folks don't know his story.
Well, he's a phenomenal musician. I'll start like in the beginning. He's born in Mobile, Alabama. His parents moved to Washington, D.C. And when they get to Washington, D.C., he starts studying violin. And I love this, and I have this photograph that I posted recently that people were like, but there's a photograph of Frederick Douglass and his grandson, John Henry Douglass. But John Henry Douglass, this grandson, becomes James Reese Europe's violin teacher, right? And I always think that, and when we think about the violin, we don't think like, right? But Frederick Douglass he had his fake Stradivarius, but Frederick Douglass was into the violin. So I always think that, just look at that. Just look at it for a while. But so James Reese Europe then moves to New York. He's a pretty prominent musician. He's working with lots of people. He starts to writing for different kinds of bands. He forms a black musicians union because he cares about how they're treated off the stage too. They perform at Carnegie Hall. He brings like 130 musicians with him, totally taking over the stage with the sound.
I can't imagine what that looked like.
Oh, man, it's unbelievable. And the Clef Club was the name of this organization. Later, he's working with the Castles, Irene and Vernon Castle. And so he's then now making dance music for them, innovating styles of dance with tempos. But then the big kicker is that he signs up to go fight in the war. And they say, why you want to fight in the war? He said, I want to serve, and they say, well, but you make music, so we want you to make music. And so he starts the regiment band, but he asks for $10,000, which is, it's a gang of money. And they come back the next day and say, we have $10,000. And so he goes. But he brings with him Noble Sissle,
Right.
you know, like it's his right hand.
Right,
They
who
both
eventually
go.
starts working with UB Blake,
Yes.
and they do a whole other
Yeah,
thing.
UB Blake stays behind. They
Right.
say, okay, so you've got to do all this other work. So
Wow.
they're still like,
Yeah.
they have this kind of like virtual relationship, you
Yeah.
know, way before it was in vogue. But they go to war, they bring in the music, they're innovating these military songs. James Reese Europe literally is going to the front lines, bringing a portable organ with him to write songs in the field. You know, getting them poisoned by mustard gas. He's in the bed writing music. Noble Sissle comes over, he's like, yo man, listen to this new piece. Right, like, so I don't know. That's not me. This is a different kind of person. And when he moves back to, when they come back to New York for their victory lap, their band is on tour, and by the end of the tour, he's murdered by his own drummer in an intermission in a concert. And it kind of puts a halt on progress.
Right.
All right, this is like Marcus Garvey time. Like everybody, it's like a thing that's building.
This is the Harlem.
And a lot of musicians at that time felt that when he died, it never was the same.
Yeah.
You know, and for me, I felt more discouraged because this would become a pattern of how black leaders would be taken out.
Yeah.
Right? Like it wouldn't be just from the inside. Sometimes it'd be from the outside. Sometimes it'd be clear. Sometimes it'd be unclear.
Yeah.
And but watching that, you know, change, I think, the trajectory of jazz. I mean, people picked up the mantle,
Right.
but they all said it ain't nothing like how James Reese Europe was doing it. You know, there's a photograph of Duke Ellington standing at the grave of James Reese Europe with a wreath in 1933. And you see in that moment, because how many photographs do you have of Duke Ellington standing at a grave?
Right.
And but he's a powerful figure.
We're talking with Jason Moran, multidisciplinary artist, MacArthur Genius winner, 2010. Here at Duke University doing a couple of performances with his band, The Bandwagon, celebrating Fats Waller amongst other folks. Let me ask you about this other role that you've played these last few years as curator. And I'm thinking specifically the installation that you did with Kara Walker for Prospect 4, you know, which was curated by our friend Trevor Schoonmaker. How important is it for you to do that kind of work also?
It's imperative to be around thinkers who maneuver and create and output in a very different way.
Yeah.
You know, music is totally ephemeral, so it doesn't live anywhere except in the body, right? Like once the sound hits you, then it's in you. But of watching people who work with tangible objects or ideas or filmmakers or et cetera, it's interesting. And Kara Walker, among many of the people that I work with, is always kind of like pushing on history in a way that I think is important. And also trying to find an intersection of how we could reimagine what history felt or looked like. And that has been maybe one of the biggest changes in my career was the kinds of collaborators I'd work with, from the dancers or choreographers like Ron Brown and Alonzo King, and working with artists like Adam Pendleton and Joan Jonas and Lorna Simpson and Carrie Mae Weems, of course Kara Walker and Julie Meritu. Like these people who really think in a way that makes me rethink how I might approach music. But then when you do that enough, then you start to form kind of like a muscle memory of what this feels like, because it is always uncomfortable.
Right.
But it's also the challenge that I like, though.
You're doing now a big project with your wife, Alicia Hall Moran, Two Wings.
Right.
You know, the music of Black American migration. Big show at Carnegie Hall, Kennedy Center also. Talk a little bit how that project came together, and really how important it is to tell that story now.
Yeah, you know, Carnegie Hall is producing right now a very big, their largest festival around migration. And they asked us to create a concert around the Great Migration.
Right.
And, you know, that's large, so, you know, and how do you jump inside that? So Alicia and I really wanted to keep it personal to parts of our own family histories, and then we could figure out a way to move outwards. And And we would also want to look, for Carnegie Hall especially, we want to look at our relationship to what we might say is classical music and how it bends, right? So Alicia and I going into that concert hall for many times to watch people perform. But then what were we missing was like our own narrative on that stage. And we wanted to pull that out. We invited, of course, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Isabel Wilkerson to read from The Warmth of Other Suns during the concert. But then we pulled together songs, a piece that I'd written for the Imani Winds called Cane, which looked at my family history in North Louisiana and Cane River, and then how it then progressed into people leaving the South, moving to Chicago, and me moving to New York. But like looking at all these histories through a sonic plate, and Alicia really kind of did, let's say, all of the work. Because Alicia is much more conceptual and much more specific than I am. And she had a demand about what kinds of stories went next to each other. And, but then also the way she composes her own pieces, the way she wove them into the frame it's a miracle. She's the kind of artist she's the artist I fell in love with when we were at Manhattan School of Music, because you could see that she was unlike any other artist that I had met, and still to this day is. And Two Wings has become like maybe one of our kind of staples, much like this thing we did at the Whitney Biennial 5 or 6 years ago called Bleed, which was a 5-day kind of explosion of ideas around performance. But this is another way, like a more personal way, of looking at the power of the Great Migration and how it changed music, how Motown is in Detroit, how the blues gets to Chicago, you know. What is North Carolina's relationship with Washington, D.C.? It's like half of D.C. is North Carolina folks. And, you know, like John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk from North Carolina moving up to New York.
Nina Simone.
Nina Simone, you know, so there's you know, people not moving just because opportunity, but, you know, it's terror. They're fleeing terror. And we also wanted to make sure we told that story, that it was terror that drove people away. And it, you know, it's one that continues to need to be told on those stages specifically, because those stages generally, you know, are geared towards, you know, certain forms but not other forms. And this was a big opportunity for us.
Talk about the challenges of working with your partner, with your life partner. You know, where do you make distinctions between, well, this is my work versus this is Alicia's work? When do we work together? And then what does any of that look like when it's not at work anymore, right? In the raising of a family and all those kinds of things.
It's a mess. It just is. But, you know, that's the kind of mess we like. Sleepless nights, loud arguments, triumphs, you know. Throwing your hands up, you know. And most of the ideas, I might say, really are Alicia's. I mean, I really, you know, we sit around each other and listen to each other make music all the time. And then there's something that I have definitely, I mean, she's the one who kind of like framed how In My Mind works, my Thelonious Monk piece. He's like, oh no, this should go here, this should go here, this should go here. Right, and she's always been there. And now that we're doing public projects as a team, which I think is necessary. You know, we think of like Ossie Davis, you know, and Ruby D, right? Like that's
Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Yeah, right. Like, you know, like people who are like you, like they
always
make,
thinking of publicly together.
They make and they make, and but it is a challenge. It's a real challenge. The kids, thankfully, they have maybe the best ideas in the family, and we really do take them up on their ideas because they hear us struggle with them. You know, and they might not acknowledge it. They're like, why are they in a bad mood? Because you know they're working on a piece. But you know, it's hard, but the reward of kind of accomplishing something great is something that we keep striving for. And that keeps us, you know, jumping into the saddle again to try to make something public.
What do you say to the hardcore jazz fan who's like, you know, Jason, all this is wonderful and everything, but when you gonna get back in the studio?
This year. I don't, you know, like that part is difficult, you know, because I have realized that it's not the only way that the music functions.
Right.
And, you know.
And probably these days at least effective.
Yeah. And, you know, like we have a record label, Alicia and I, call Yes Records. It's very low to the ground. You can't find it streaming on Spotify.
Yeah, I figured that out.
It ain't nowhere.
I'm like, Thanksgiving at the Vanguard, where the hell is it?
It's on Bandcamp only because Bandcamp gives rights and price and return to their artist. And you set the price, right? Apple don't set the price. Oh, it's only a certain length, so it's $6.99. What? Tapes was $6.99 in 1983. Why my music is still cost the same? But the gas gone up. Everything else going up around it, but the music is still like $6.99.
The electricity.
Man, no. Anyway, but so we produce that way, and this year we're going to put out a few more records on this label, Yes Records, and it's been exciting to kind of just have something that is a slow trickle, that we invest our money into. But it's also this real notion of African Americans owning their masters. And music is really an important thing. It's not as common as we might think, but it is a process that many people and artists that I admire have fought for. Right. And I had an 18-year relationship with Blue Note Records. It was amazing. We did 9 records together. But now I'm out of that relationship. Yeah. So it's been great to now build a new catalog based on our work.
We've been joined by the great Jason Moran. Jason, thank you for taking time out to join us.
My pleasure, brother. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black, culture over everything.